Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Player vs. Live podcast. As always, my name is Gabo and I will be your host. Guys, this next episode is super interesting. I was really happy that I got to talk to my next guest. He is an economist, lifelong gamer, and professor at the Indiana University. He has devoted his research into studying the phenomena of games, video games, virtual worlds, and virtual economies. He has written several books, but I was mostly intrigued by his latest release, Life is a Game: What Game Design Says About the Human Condition. I think that a lot of us at some point have wondered if life is a game or have heard the phrase, life is a game. I didn't really pay any attention to the words at the beginning. However, the more I play video games now and the more I invest myself into gaming, I've become more convinced that this phrase might actually be true. But what does it mean? Hopefully we'll find out. Please welcome my next guest, Edward Castronova. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you coming to talk to me. I've been on a quest to find academics and thinkers like yourself that I could talk to that are willing to talk to me about video games and game design and what these why is it important to think about these concepts for the up and coming generations. And I was super happy that you actually reached out to me and said that you wanted to talk to me. So do you mind giving us a brief intro of who you are and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Edward Castronova. I go by the nickname Ted, for what it's worth. And I'm a professor at Indiana University. I have a PhD in economics. So I guess by training, I'm an economics professor. But I don't teach economics. I teach about video games. And the connection there is that video games and their design has a lot of similarities to economic modeling incentives and things like that. So I teach in the game design program here at Indiana University, and with the focus on the more academic side of games. Like we have people on the faculty who do a lot of crunchy game design stuff, working with Unity, doing digital art, things like that, which that's not me. What I do is teach about the bigger concepts in games. And I also have a class about the economy of games.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I do.
So tell me a little bit about your classes. What kind of topics do you cover, and how do you curate them?
Yeah. Well, I have a big class and I have a little class. In my big class, which is about 100 people, it's called Introduction to Games, and it's a really broad survey of everything about games, and it's impossible to cover everything really, but I try to cover well, first of all, we use board games because in our program we view games as systems, and if you play a computer game, you don't really get to know the system itself all that well. You're constantly reacting to the system that the computer is managing. So in this class, what we do is we play board games because the people have to implement the system when you're playing a board game. You don't have computer help. So it just helps people to see the systems a little bit better. It helps people to get under the hood. So that's one of the big foci of the class is to get systems. But I also I have the students read a couple of really deep essays about the nature of games. One of them is the book by
Let me write these down.
Huizinga, Johann Huizinga, his book Homo Ludens, HOMOLUDENS, Homo Ludens. It's about 100 years old, and he really introduced the idea that games are important to study. And then I have him read an essay by Tolkien, who's the author of The Lord of the Rings. And once he wrote down an essay about why he did what he did, why he made these fantasy environments. And this essay is called On Fairy Stories. It's also about 100 years old. and the students read that. So technically they learn about systems, but then on the more uh, broad conceptual side, they encounter these thinkers who are connecting games and fantasy to history and human affairs. And those are the main elements in that class. And then my smaller classes, I I work on like more narrow topics. Like this spring, I'm doing a course where we're going to look at history through the lens of games.
Mm-hmm.
So it's viewing history through games. So play games and learn things in the games, learn things about history that you don't necessarily get from books.
I
So
see.
there's that. I have a class called, well, I have a class in virtual economies. So
Mm-hmm.
designing your own virtual economy and a couple others.
You're a gamer.
Sure.
You have a headset
Oh
and
yeah.
everything.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's my work.
It's imperative. Um, when you said when you were mentioning about board games, it made me think that to really understand the game, you have to be the dungeon master, and when you're playing video games, like actual digital video games, the dungeon master is the computer, and you're just being part of the adventure. So
Right.
I totally get why the board games are part of your curriculum. I think it's actually pretty cool. But what is the intangible that you think students get? Like, what is the power behind these games, and why understanding them are gives us tools? What kind of tools do we get from understanding these?
That's a good question. I could answer it a million ways. Let me interpret it this way: you're asking about what's different about games than, let's say, someone talking to you or reading a book or something like that. What's different in a game? And just want to point out something that I think when I say it, everyone will be like, "Oh, of course," but it's really quite profound. People can learn very, very complicated games, but those same people have difficulty with, understanding a newspaper article. Let's say,
Mm-hmm.
I've had students who, they're not the kind of people who are going to dominate a calculus class or a programming class, and yet by the end of my board gaming class, they're playing extremely complex systems. So that says something about games and the way that they interface with the brain. That there's like this miracle of learning that happens with games.
Mm-hmm.
People who you wouldn't expect to be able to master dense material, and they do, right? And it's because of the way games allow you to play with them and interact with them. So that's one sense. Games have this ability to go deep into the brain
Mm-hmm.
and be comprehended by people at a level that you can't understand books, you can't understand speeches, people talking. And the other thing that is profound about this, it's similar, and that is um, there are brilliant people out there, brilliant strategists, and our education system, our meritocracy system, completely overlooks them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you think about like the SAT, it measures people's uh, ability to work with words and ability to work with mathematical concepts. Mhm. It doesn't test people's ability to understand problems and strategize.
Mm-hmm.
And my barber is a brilliant strategist. And I know this from showing him complicated games and teaching them to him. And then the first time we play, he beats me. Right. And I know the game before he does.
Right.
It just happened actually last week. There were three of us, and Jeff, the barber, he just creamed us, and he'd never seen that game before. And so how can that be? Now, this is a guy, he's a barber, it's his own barber shop. But if I gave him the rules, written down rules to the game, he says, I can't learn a game that way. I got to have somebody show it to me.
Mm-hmm.
So something, and so when he was going through school, he wasn't considered like, oh, brilliant Jeff or anything like that. It was just that's just Jeff over there,
Mm-hmm.
because the whole business of reading, writing, taking notes and everything, that's not him, but he's a genius, right?
Right.
So I tell students in my class, it's like, you may have gotten to this point, freshman, sophomore in college, and most of your academic career, you've had people telling you that you're not that bright, not that good. You might be a genius in this area, but our system isn't gonna
Right.
promote you on that basis. It's not gonna discover you. It's not gonna. And but I know, I will know because we're gonna play games in here, and we'll find out who's really, really good at games.
Do you think a gamification of a school system, it seemed like a very interesting concept. My question is, do you think that this is a necessity or is a problem that we need to resolve for the future?
What I would say about gamification in the classroom is, I'll relate my own experience, which is I've tried many things, right? I've experimented with many, many different game-like mechanics. And I've learned some things about what students like and do not like in terms of, if we think of the classroom as a game, what students like is a single player game that has absolute and unchanging objective standards.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they want. That also happens to be the grading structure that traditionally schooling has evolved,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like each student takes a test. If you get a high score, you get an A, right? Not graded on a curve, you get a high score, you grade an A. They hate anything that's PvP, so students
Right.
competing with one another. They don't like having to group up. They don't like funny like leveling curves where it takes more effort to get the next grade up. They just really want the kind of game that they're currently playing. And so my prediction that is ordinary school.
Mm-hmm.
You learn material, you take a test, you get a grade based on your test.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they want to do. And so yeah, they want a single player experience where success is relative to a fixed standard and not relative to other people. And so I think most education gamification projects have failed, are failing now, will fail in the future, because what they're trying to do is go away from that model and say, what if we tried a different kind of game? And students don't like that. This is another important thing to know about gamification. If the underlying strategic situation is not interesting, gamifying won't help. Okay,
Mm.
so people who say, I'm going to gamify my car dealership or something.
Right.
It's like I'm going to give people in my office badges if they have a good customer interaction or something like that. And people are like, don't give me a badge, give me a raise. Give me
Give me
a
something
promotion.
real.
And so gamification is this idea that occurs to people from time to time, and I really don't think there's much to it. I've been on
Mm-hmm.
too many projects where boring people with boring ideas and boring projects say, let's bring out some game people and they're going to make it interesting. And it's like, that's not how it works. The best thing that serious people can do with games is let a game be successful as a game, and then try to get some serious content into that game. And instead what they do is they take, reams of boring stuff, and then they turn it over to the game people and say, make that fun.
Mm.
It's like, nope.
I see what you're saying.
Because when you go to make it fun, I've been, like I said, I've been on the receiving end of this stuff. You get all this boring stuff and you go, all right, we got to get rid of this, and then we can get started. And the serious people go, what? No, you can't get rid of that. You have to make sure they read these 3 pages of dense text while they're questing, and they're not gonna,
Right.
you're just, so I'm kind of sour about gamification and serious games and things like that.
I think it's an interesting perspective because I I've been getting familiar with some of these books, and well, part of the one I'm reading, I'm sure you're familiar with, is Jane McConaughey's Reality is Broken, and she's become kind of uh, uh like an icon with a set of ideas in the game world.
I really like Jane. I really like that book because I think the essential point there is I don't agree with the policy takeaway. So maybe her policy takeaway is because reality is broken, we have to gamify reality. I would say more that reality is not doing its job. So I agree with her that reality is broken. But if reality would do its job, and that doesn't mean gamifying it, if it would do its job, then games wouldn't be so popular.
Mm-hmm.
And its job, in my view, the real world, is to give people a sense of meaning and place.
I guess my question is like we put a lot of meaning into games. Like me as a person, I've put a lot of meaning because I've played a lot of games. I played several countless of hours, and part of me is always asking like, is there a deeper meaning to this? Is gaming affecting my way of thinking, or is gaming affecting the way I live? Right. And this is where your metaphor and your book, your latest release, Life is a Game, takes this metaphor very seriously.
So I mentioned Tolkien's essay on fairy stories. If you're thinking that playing games is an escape, and you're wondering if there's meaning in them, I recommend that essay because he's very clear about the way how important the fantasy realms are. And thinking about that, and over the years, I started to, I guess, rethink what the human condition actually is.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and so this book is about life being a game for real. It doesn't just have the features of a game; it actually is a game. It has victory conditions, it has strategies, it has resources, it has everything that games have, and it has multiplayer modes and single player modes. And it's pretty simple, really, to prove that life is a game if you use the mathematical definition of what a game is. A
Mm-hmm.
game is a set of players, a set of strategies, and a mapping that goes from the strategies into outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so some mechanic, basically. And is that not what the human condition really is, right? We're players are here, we have strategies, we have choices we can make, and there are real outcomes.
I think part of the reason, well, at least from my internalizing of this concept, is that for some reason when we say the word game, people take it as, oh, they're silly, they assimilate it to video games or things that kids play with, but we're talking about games as a actual phenomena of society.
There are important concepts that need to be kept separate. One is play and the other is games.
Mm-hmm.
So play is any activity that's not serious. And a game is, as I said, a set of players, a set of strategies, and a mapping from the strategies to outcomes for the players.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you could be playing a game that's very serious. So the elections are serious,
Yeah.
but they have all the features of a game, and game theorists will analyze them as such. There is a tendency, though, for people to use the word game and assume that you're talking about playing and it's not serious.
Mm-hmm.
But you can be very serious in the games that you play. Of course, life is one of those.
I mean, in your book, you mention a lot of philosophers and thinkers that throughout history have quoted life as a game. Why do you think? Why do you think that is? Why do we want to look at life as a game?
Well, it's really old. First of all, it goes back to the earliest Greeks. We're talking about Greek philosophers, and so they are reflecting on the nature of the universe, and they talk about the universe just being like a spinning top that the gods are playing with, and
Mm-hmm.
these kind of metaphors. And so, and then it recurs for thousands of years. It keeps coming up. Life is a game. Life is a game. And I think they do that because they recognize parallels between these cultural artifacts that we create and play with and what we do when we're in the real world. There's all these parallels.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spend a couple chapters in there just sort of establishing, you see this thing you do in the real world, isn't that just like this thing that we do in games? And so I try to make that explicit.
Mm-hmm.
People do things in daily life that, if you reflect on it, look exactly like some games that they've played.
Games
And
is
so the connection is natural. Once you encounter an artifact that has been created by a human being and said, this is a game, play this, and you've encountered it and you go, you know what, there's not that much different between what I just did in this game that the person gave me and what I did yesterday at work.
Hmm.
Once you see that connection, it becomes kind of natural. And all I've done in the book is expand it to everything, right?
Hmm.
The whole human condition is a game.
So when when you say that life is a game, then it implies that there is a victory condition, as you say, and there's a set of strategies and tactics that we can implement to not necessarily to win 100%, but to increase our chances of success.
Yeah, see, I'm not a philosopher, I'm not a theologian. I recognize that different people have different concepts of what the victory conditions would be.
Hmm.
But as a person who's an expert on games, what I can say to people is that there should be a consistency between your concept of the victory conditions,
Hmm.
your strategic commitments with respect to those victory conditions, and then your tactics, your day-to-day activities.
Hmm.
Those three things should be in alignment. If if I just analyze what a person is doing as part of a game, right?
Hmm.
Those, if I'm watching someone playing Catan, I'm the board game Catan. That's one of the things I'm going to look for. So here's the victory conditions. Here's what you seem to be doing strategically, and this turn, this is what you did. This
Right.
was your tactics, and those things should line up, right?
Hmm.
And so, while I'm not trained to criticize people over what their grand philosophical commitments might be, and from those what victory conditions they get out of it. But what I can say is that your victory condition should have something to do with your strategic commitments, which should have something to do
Right.
with your day-to-day tactics. And so a lot of the book is about sort of connecting those three things and asking the reader to just reflect, are those three things in alignment for
Mm.
me?
I'm curious as to how do you think someone goes about developing these strategies and tactics, like in a real world scenario?
Well, I think that most people, at least today, well, certainly they don't view themselves as strategic actors in terms of what they're doing in life, right? There's a lot of wandering. I wander. It's pretty normal. And so you wander into some mix of commitment strategies and tactics. And I think it's just, sort of haphazard, right? People just develop these things. And then at some point, people start self examining. I mentioned in the book, if you are, let's say, committed to the earth, at some point you start asking yourself, should I use this straw? You see
Hmm.
how that's like, I have this commitment to the earth. My strategies are to, let's say, not use non recyclable materials.
Hmm.
And then day to day tactics, I'm drinking this drink and it has a plastic straw. Maybe. So you see how at points, at different points in a person's life, they encounter things and they judge, like, am I being consistent all the way through?
Hmm.
But I think most people, they don't ever. There, there are lots and lots of people who claim they have some high level commitment and walk around with tactics that are completely different and have basically no strategy other than, just going to respond right now however I
Right.
feel.
On a
So,
day-to-day basis.
and a lot of people say it's important to be intentional and mindful, and I think that's consistent with what I'm saying. Being
Right.
intentional, being mindful is to connect those
Mm.
three layers.
Yeah. So, like, not being in alignment with your strategy and your tactics could have serious repercussions in terms of your like self fulfillment.
Well, I would say your victory conditions,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I stay in my lane here and just keep looking at this from a game design perspective, when you have inconsistency between the philosophical layer, the strategic layer, and the tactical layer, your chances of actually achieving whatever your victory conditions are go down.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's not the end of the world in your worldview. I mean, that's okay. That's a way of thinking about it. But if you have any philosophical commitments whatsoever, that it should be something you think about,
Right.
right? If I if I think saving the earth is really, really important, then I should set up my life so that
Right.
strategy and tactics do that. If I think that getting to heaven is important, I should be paying attention to the strategic and tactical aspects of that.
Which is another way. Which is another way that you describe strategies is through religious orthodoxy as well, right?
Yeah, what I try to do is I couldn't possibly cover all of them, but I try to do an analysis of, I think, 6 different types of victory conditions that you could have, and then what kind of strategies and tactics would work with that if you
Hmm.
viewed that as a game. So, um, just one of them is the I just want to feel good
Yeah,
thing, which a lot of people, you ask them what actually is most important. Say, I just want to have a good
just want to
time.
be happy.
Yeah, I just want to be happy. And so I go through, well, what kind of strategies and tactics would that involve? And actually, I come to the conclusion that that set of victory conditions is virtually impossible to achieve. It's like internally inconsistent, but that's getting too much into the weeds. But others, the one I also talk about being a mystic. If your victory conditions are not as concrete as I want to be happy or I want to go to heaven, you want to sort of align with the universe, and then what are the strategies and tactics that come out of that. And I do have a chapter about orthodoxy, which would be um, the sort of traditional, choose a religious tradition, join it, follow the rules,
Hmm.
with the hope of getting to the afterlife as it is described by that religion. And then for that one, I use my own religion a lot. I'm Roman Catholic, so uh, that there are a lot of examples from Roman Catholic thinking about uh, getting to heaven, things like that. But to me, it was fun to write that because it was thinking of the Catholic Church as like this game,
Yeah.
that you're trying to play, and that was fun to write.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. I mean, if you take it out, even if you take it outside church or religion, maybe like let's say martial arts, like
Sure.
they can definitely provide this set of structure in your life to aspire a victory
Hmm.
condition in a specific train of philosophy.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So, and this is what you describe as taking a stance towards life, right? This is like
Mhm.
you basically choosing what pose you're gonna choose to engage this game that is
Yeah.
life. There's something interesting that you mentioned in the book about these stances, that it's not something that necessarily is static. Like you might
Right.
fluctuate between them. Maybe help me understand how does one do that? How does one go through life and changing stances?
So the idea of a stance is that it's this triple, right? It's the philosophical commitments, the strategic commitments, and the tactical actions. Those three things fitting together. That's a stance. And I have a chapter 2 where I evaluate stances, not any specific one, but just if you're going to evaluate a stance, if you wanted to choose a stance, if you're thinking about what kind of stance to have, what features do you want? So like I was talking about before, you want it to be internally consistent.
Yes.
But and now to respond to what you're asking about now is you don't want it to be too rigid. You want it to be flexible, right? Uh, you want your stances to be able to respond to changing conditions. And um, it would be ideal if it was robust in the sense that um, if something terrible were to happen, you you'd be able to, your stance would survive. So
Right.
again, just I'm a Roman Catholic, so I'll just use this as an example. Um, my kids and my wife and I, we go to church all the time, even when times are good, because we know the church will be there if something terrible happens.
Hmm.
And this practice of going is something that will be there for us in that case. So that's sort of
Right.
a mark in favor of this Orthodox religion, is that it's got that stability. Now, what if a big crisis happens and your stance is inadequate? And that's, I think, how stances change.
Hmm.
People, and with all due respect to younger people, when I was younger, I developed stances that were brittle. They were actually honestly brittle. And as various events and news and revelations came into my life, about my family or about the world or about the workplace, relationships, and those things would come, the stance I had would just break, right? It just wasn't working. I couldn't find a tactic that fit with that victory condition
Right.
under the facts I was living under. I could give a direct example of this. So this is autobiographical. It's not in the book,
Yes.
but I'm not afraid to tell this story. It's a little bit personal, but it's basically I got pregnant. So me and my girlfriend got pregnant when I was in college, and at that time I was a diehard atheist. And I was spending time trying to convince religious people to give up their beliefs. And so she and I, being atheists, we didn't think twice about it. We just went and got an abortion. And something kind of weird happened that day. It was like sitting at the dentist's office. She was in there and I was flipping through magazines with other people, and we went home. But I remember thinking, what if there's some possibility that those cells were actually a person? What if? And I said to myself, well, I don't think they are, but I'm going to think about it. The deed was done. And I spent 10 years trying to come up with some sort of philosophical argument why what I did was okay. And I couldn't find it, right? Every time I came across some argument that I thought was, okay, that's solid. And then I was like, there's always that 1% possibility that it really was a person, and I don't really know. And so the stance I had, the sort of strict atheism at that point didn't work for me, right? Because I started to think I might have done something bad. And I started to wonder, what do you do when, just think about it, just take it out of the context of abortion. What would you do if suddenly one day you realize there's a 1% chance that you'd committed a murder, or 1/10 of 1%, or some percent chance that you committed a murder? And it would be unsettling if you had a stance that said, A, that's bad, and B, there's nothing you can do about it. There's no making
Right.
amends and
There's no
everything.
redemption.
There's no redemption. It would be a little unsettling. And so that's the sense in which like big life events
Mm-hmm.
can cause you. And I could have gone in a million different directions from there, but that's just an example of how I had a life event that over the course of a decade made me really reevaluate the stance I had.
The idea of stances is very interesting to me because for me it takes into account after writing the entire book, and it was recently released, like maybe like a month ago, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a little bit less than a month ago.
Okay. Like, what are you hoping? Like, why write it? Why do you think somebody is
Yeah.
getting out of it?
Well, okay. So on the one hand, when you're a professor, there's tremendous pressure to publish,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's like you put pressure on you to just blab to the world. And, you hope you have something worth saying. Yeah, my goal in writing the book was to um, talk to people who are of a gaming mindset and validate them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I wanted people who, and what I mean by of a gaming mindset, I mean they like sports, they like video games, they like strategic problems. People like Jeff the Barber.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to write a book that validated that as an approach to life for those folks, and then within that to um, get people to look at different stances with an open mind. I guess if I had a subversive agenda, it would be there's one point in the book where I say I think we can get along better for the following reason. We may be different in our theological and philosophical commitments. So the philosophical layer, we might be very, very different. But what I think I've noticed is that at the strategic layer,
Mm-hmm.
people really don't have that many disagreements. So let's say you're a follower of Jean-Paul Sartre and Camus and Foucault, and you are an atheist, and you're a humanist for uh, just out of a sense of radical freedom to be a humanist, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm a Catholic, so if we were to have a philosophical discussion, you'd be like,
Yeah,
man.
we wouldn't agree with each other.
But if we were walking down the street and there was a little old lady who needed help across the street,
Right,
we're both going to help her
right.
because those strategies fit with our victory conditions. And I think you'll find that after the events of life come through and rattle up your stances and you settle on something, you're going to find a lot of strategic consistency with other people of goodwill.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of the secret agenda of the book if is to kind of look at all these different stances. If you think of it as a game, we have a lot less that we disagree about.
Mm. And if you do disagree with somebody in the strategic level, then you might as well stay away from that person.
Yeah, or learn from them. If they
Mm,
if two people are doing something different strategically, you look at them and say, are they getting closer to their victory condition because they're acting that way?
mm.
Like, let's say I encountered, let's say I was the angry Christian.
Okay.
Okay, I'm the angry Christian, and I'm going down the street, and I see a little old lady crossing the street, and she needs help, but I see that she has a burqa on. Oh, she's Muslim. I don't. I'm not gonna. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to help Muslims, right? That's well, I personally I know that's inconsistent with Christianity, but
Right.
let's say that person doesn't. The angry Christian doesn't, and here comes the absurd humanist, the follower of Derrida, with his black turtleneck and his brown cigarette, and he's the beret, and he's helping her, and then he walks down the street with a big smile on his face, and I'm still angry.
Right.
It's like I can learn from him. He's got a strategy that's getting him closer to
Right.
his victory conditions, and I don't feel closer to mine.
Part of this book is also talking about the importance of games and the emergence of games in our society, right? Like back
Mhm.
when you wrote
The Exodus to the Virtual World
Exodus to
was,
the Virtual World.
yeah, I think it was my second book. Yeah.
Um, that was a long time ago. And gaming has constantly been evolving since then, right? What is your
Mhm.
view? Where is gaming going?
Oh, I don't think anything's going to stop it. I'm convinced that we are going to live in a world that's more or less like the movie in The Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's more or less the way things are going. And there are all kinds of controversies and things going on today. But you know what? Time's arrow is technology, right? The things that cause actual lasting change to the human condition are technology things, the new tools that people have. And all this other stuff is a reaction to those developments. And I think just understanding human nature the way it is, year by year, minute by minute, hour by hour, our experience is becoming digitally mediated to a greater and greater extent. So certainly games, people playing games, but the amount of time we spend getting our experience from a screen is increasing. And it's technology. It has its good and bad sides,
Right.
but there's no question that 100 years from now, a significant number of people will not leave their chairs. They'll have various tubes bringing stuff in and taking stuff out, work, on the net, and that's just how they're going to live. I don't think that's good. I also think, though, that there's a future for people who live like the Amish. Certain that there will be some people who will not be in the system like that. It's just to put a really concrete point on this, pornography is changing the way that men approach interpersonal relationships.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to stop. That's not going to stop, right? That's just going to continue. There will always be some men who say, I don't care, let that be over there. I'm going to live my life with flesh and blood women, and we're going to have, the actual old time family, man, woman, children,
Mm-hmm.
right? This is sort of like the Amish do. And I really see things splitting. I see there being an online world that's going one way, and then a smaller sort of flesh and blood world that's going somewhere else. Now, within all that, video games are going to play a huge role in the online part of the world. There probably will become ways of engaging that aren't labeled as video games, but the lessons of engagement that the video game companies are discovering will just sort of be used everywhere. And so in that sense, gaming will just sort of grow to become a common experience of everyone almost all the time. Yeah,
But
just ask yourself. I mean, we can sit here and ask ourselves, what would stop this development? Okay. And you realize nothing, right? It's not like we're going to reach some technological limit where games and digital media they just can't get any better. We're not going to hit that, right? That's not going to happen. We're not going to hit some point where, uh, gosh, there's not enough stories for people to consume. Humanity is an endless generator of stories, and it won't be too long that the formulas people use to make games and movies are made completely into AI. And so they can crank out a new
yeah,
Marvel Universe movie just
right, right.
just by pressing a button. So I just, is there something in human nature that would stop this? I don't think so. I think people think that, it's not the real world. Okay, you could have said that 50 years ago with TV and watch what happened. Okay, humanity is just going to do what's comfortable. So I don't think there's anything that's going to stop it.
When you said that our lives might be looking like the Matrix, I hope you were gonna say Ready Player One.
Well, that's just in a similar vein. I think the Matrix is got a real good punch to it. I like the
Mm,
idea that the people in the Matrix are the energy for the Matrix, and I'm like, that's kind of how it is, right?
right. Well, but then it begs the question, if the evolution of gaming is unstoppable, right? What is the utopia? Like what are we looking forward to? What is the things that will eventually be like the singularity of gaming?
Uh, well, when you use words like utopia, uh, this isn't a utopic line of thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a dystopic line of thinking. I love games. I'm a game player. I'm a game expert. I do not think that a world in which people sit in chairs and play video games all day is a good outcome
Right.
for the human person. To the extent that there's anything good on this planet, I would put it in the man, woman, child thing, right? The flesh and blood living in a village, right? That
Mm-hmm.
to me is where people are most likely to find happiness. Villages, I got to say it, churches, families, that's happiness. Um, and so I would be someone who's always about balancing the games, the technology, the online,
Mm-hmm.
and help using it as a structure that strengthens these sort of natural human affinities rather than undermines them. But I'm under no illusion that that the online thing that happens is going to be somehow a great game utopia,
Mm-hmm.
um, a great utopia for the human condition. Now, that having been said, the games in there are going to be fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
The game industry is discovering things about human psychology and human behavior that we in the academy at universities, it would take us hundreds of years to discover. Game companies can just run an experiment and get the results in 8 hours
Right.
using
They have millions of
millions of
users.
people.
Yeah.
And so if you really want to look for the scientific future about human behavior, you have to look to the game industry because that's where all the experiments are happening. The research, of course, the knowledge, the findings are being held tightly within that industry, but they're there and they're going to be used to make just marvelous, wonderful experiences. I mean, I play this game World of Warcraft that came out 16 years ago, and I think it is the signature technical and aesthetic achievement of the early 21st century. I mean, it just the technology that was required to make that game what it is, its sustainability, its story, its beauty, its humor. I mean, it is an absolutely amazing achievement, and there are a number of things like that. And that's just the start. Every dream that a person has ever had, they will be able to live through.
Yeah. Well, speaking of World of Warcraft, I actually saw your lecture on World of Warcraft. You have it
Mhm.
uploaded on YouTube, and for anybody that is interested of understanding a deeper meaning, I think it's a great lecture from deeper meaning
Oh,
from
thank you.
World of Warcraft. I think it's a great lecture. It
Thank you.
contextualizes the time and the release of the art, and it's pretty interesting point of view. But what is so fascinating about World of Warcraft to me, and you also mentioned this in your book, is that it's very much like life, right? It seems that life has this very gray area of victory conditions where Warcraft fits right into that, right? You don't know how to
Mhm.
win the game, but yeah, you're still playing it. You're wanting to level up.
Well, earlier in the podcast, I said that one of the reasons games are popular is because the real world isn't doing its job. And I said it's not giving people a sense of meaning and it's not giving them a sense of place
Hmm.
where they fit in. And Warcraft and games like that answer those two questions very strongly, very firmly.
Hmm.
Okay. So when you're in World of Warcraft, your meaning is you are a contributor to an effort to defeat evil.
Hmm.
That's that's why you're there. That's why you're important. And the messages of the game, sometimes in a very sophomoric way, but it's this constantly repeated message that there are bad things trying to wipe out everything, trying to make people unhappy, trying to enslave them, destroy them. And you are there to fight that. And that gives people meaning. In the words of Gordon Walton, who's a famous game designer, he said, everyone wants to be a hero, right? So in a game like that, everyone is a hero. There's something bad out there. It's identifiable. You've been told by the elders, your mentors, the quest givers, go get rid of that thing, protect us from that. And that gives you meaning. And as far as place, you know your place. You know what your level is. You know what your class is. You know where you are in the world. You know what the next task is. So you don't, you can wander if you want, but you always know what's being expected of you and what your place is in that world. And you could say, I think it's ridiculous, professor. Why, if you're a grown person, why would you go in a video game for all that? And I would answer back, that's how bad the real world is, right? If the real world offered anything like that, I think people would prefer it.
Hmm.
But instead, what happens? There's a game and it's good enough that it's better than what's out in the real world.
Right. And but there's one big question that I want to ask, and it's very
Mm.
philosophical. I don't know if I don't know if you'll have a concrete answer. If life is a game, right? If we're taking
Yeah.
this seriously, what is the meaning of it? Why do we want to play? Why go ahead and play it?
Oh, I have a very concrete answer for that. Uh, and I'm just going to play the cards right here. One of the early Catholic thinkers, brilliant guy named Saint Augustine, who lived in the 300s, he said, "Our hearts are restless until they rest in Thee, Thee being God." I think we're all searching for God one way or another, and we are restless until we develop that relationship and make it concrete. And if you read the Tolkien essay, he goes into greater depth about this. But the things we're doing in video games are part of that journey. That
Hmm.
I'll give you an example. I don't see fire breathing devils out here on the street, right? I don't
Right.
have to fight them, but I know there's nasty stuff in this world. I know it. Okay. And I'm afraid of it. I should be. The nasty stuff that's in the world, we should be afraid of. And so I go into the game, and when I'm playing, and then here comes this fire breathing demon coming at me. And we could say, oh, that's just something that someone made up. But you could ask yourself, you know, why is it why is it that the people who make this game, who aren't on a religious crusade or anything, why do they make the enemies look the way they do? Right? Where do they get those images? why do we have this notion that the angelic things look this way and the demonic things look this way? And Tolkien argued that we have those forms in our head because there's something eternal about them,
Mm-hmm.
that there's sort of the common way for lots of people to view what's good and what's bad. The point being, you go into a video game and the symbols you're looking at are depictions of something deeper that we know is true. That when we read novels, so fantasy novels, any imaginative, creative arts, paintings, movies, whatever, that we're encountering symbols and they arrest us, they grab us because they are pointing to something that is real. It may not be physical, it might be metaphysical, but it's real.
Right.
Okay, so just in the example I gave, it's evil, right? We know evil is real. And so when I play a game and they have symbols of things that are evil, the reason it connects to me in a way that, let's say, a blue sphere wouldn't, right? The reason it connects to me is because it reminds me of something that is real.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in playing games and engaging with art, we're connecting to universal truths, for better, sometimes tightly, sometimes loosely, but there's a connection there to things that are really important. And so in that sense, even without being conscious of it, I think as we're playing our games, we're sort of dancing with the infinite, just a way you might put it, as part of our journey, right? Our journey of self-discovery. So that's what I think the real meaning of games is. They're like an echo, a sign of things that are very, very big, universal, and important.
Hmm. Is there a way to lose in the game of life?
Absolutely.
What would that be?
Well, my stance is the orthodox stance, and I believe that you can go to hell.
That would be losing in your
That would be losing.
right.
Right. And I base that on numerous experiences of what hell could be like. And I
Mhm.
can tell you, I don't want to be there. So that would be losing.
Right, right. Um, but in some way that if I may, in some way that says that you don't get to lose until you're at the end of your life.
Well, C.S. Lewis wrote that if we could see the actual, let's say, moral condition of a person, if it could be depicted, there have been points in my life where I would have looked like an absolute demon. The most horrible thing anyone would have wanted to look at. Not
Right.
like a demon, like, oh, cool, he's so powerful, but just an object of disgust. And that's and fear, because I was really not living the kind of life that a person should lead.
Okay.
Right. And C.S. Lewis said there are other people that if you were to see them, like, the little old lady, if you saw it, she'd be this beautiful angel. Okay. So the point being, at any point in time, we're either walking toward something that meets our victory condition or we're walking away from it.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, you don't know who wins until the game's over.
You talk about all these stances and how one of them is actually pursuing a lot of pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but when I think of somebody, like if I were to evaluate who is winning in a game of life, right? I would say the person who is enjoying it the most is winning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's a valid stance, sure.
it begs the question then to ask myself, like, oh, is having fun all there is to in life, right?
Well, I think most people have the following experience, and that is uh, they get this notion in their head of what's going to make them happy, what the source of pleasure is, and then they pursue that, and then they're unhappy. Right? That's a pretty common autobiographical statement of lots of people. You read autobiographies of folks when they're older, and they always say, well, when I was young, I thought if I did this, 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 and this, I'd be happy, and I wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really common problem. Actually, if you read the happiness literature, There's a whole scientific literature on what makes people happy. And it turns out that the sort of basic, simple understanding of what would cause you to be happy is actually wrong. And so if at any given point in time, we look at all the people who are happy, we'll find that, for example, there's a distinction. Some people might be having pleasure right now, but pretty soon, a couple hours, a couple weeks, maybe a couple of years, they're going to be miserable. Okay. And you can use the example of drug abuse, right? I just took some heroin. I'm feeling great. My pleasure's through the roof.
Right.
Right. But that's not going to last. Right. Whereas on the other hand, if you look at people who are parents, for example, and they've done this, you follow parents around and say, are you happy right now? And they're like, no, because they've got to take care of, there's a diaper, there's 5 minutes later, are you happy now? No. My kid dumped my Coke all over the car. 10 minutes later, are you happy? No. So parents will consistently say that at any given moment, especially if the kids are young, they're not happy. And yet, all parents will tell you there's nothing that gives you more contentment and joy than to be a parent. So, when you say
Right.
it's like there's this contradiction, and it's completely supported in game design. There's this contradiction that if you give people whatever they want, they won't be happy, right? If you say what I need to be happy is all this stuff, and you give it to them, they won't be happy. What makes people happy, and research supports this, is things that take a lot of work to develop,
Right.
such as a long run relationship in a community, staying in a community for a long time, like not moving, for example, makes people happy. Having a mission in life makes people happy. Well, you don't get a mission in life just dumped on you. You have to go do the work, right? Being a parent, helping other people, that makes you happy.
Right.
Well, that's not free. You have to go do it. So the whole idea of having a stance based on pleasure, I argue, leads ultimately to other stances,
Right.
other kinds of victory conditions. I'm too old to care about sharing this kind of stuff, but I know exactly what I'm talking about when I make this contrast between the things that I feel strongly right now will make me happy, won't. Right? The thing.
Yeah. To
And
me, a gaming analogy would be that, let's say, I don't know if you know the game Souls,
Dark Souls.
Dark Souls 3.
Yeah,
Yes.
I know of it. I can't play it. It's too hard.
Okay, so basically that, right? If the
Yeah.
game, if let's say, if in the analogy of the hedonist approach, which is the pleasure seeking, if you were to play that game, you would just want to beat every boss in the first try.
Yeah.
And after
no pleasure ends up coming from that.
Exactly.
So look, our whole world is built around, I'm an economist, okay, so I understand this as well. Maybe I'm not a good economist, but I understand it pretty well. Our whole world is built around the idea that people become happy when they have, let's say, more income, or when they have more freedoms, right? We're sort of built, our society, our policies are built up around that. And game designers look at a game and they say, well, don't just give people income. Don't give them the resources right away. And above all, don't make them free. Put rules on them, because that's what they enjoy.
Right.
So it's, in a way, our whole world, our whole conception of what we should be doing with our society is incorrect.
Right.
And you see this in economic models. There's this concept called utility, and if it's understood correctly, it's not a bad idea. But it's often understood to be, listen, these people have low utility. If we give them income, it'll raise their utility. So we should just always, make sure everyone has income. When we know the truth is, people really benefit from income if they don't have that much. But in terms of happiness research, it is extremely important that people get their income through their own work.
Right.
They're far more unhappy being unemployed than having low income. And I'm not saying that income doesn't matter. That's not my point. My point is, having a mission is
more important,
really critical for a person, to have a mission that has meaning. And that's why unemployment is such an important thing that we should be worried about, that our answers to various problems should not be just kind of coming in as the government and fixing somebody's problem. It's rather, what we should be thinking about is is creating structures within which people thrive. That's what we should be doing.
And you can argue that a game-like structure would benefit the human condition.
Yeah.
All right, Edward, this was super enlightening for me. I actually really enjoyed it, and I could speak to you
Yeah,
like
me
for
too.
another hour. But
Yeah.
I'm sure
But
you.
I gotta go have lunch.
Yeah, and me too. Actually, I actually do need to go have lunch. There's something about your book that I think resonates with the concept of my podcast, and I really appreciated you coming over here and telling your story. Is there any closing
Thanks.
remarks that you want to say?
No, I just really appreciate the opportunity, as always, to talk. Right, we're professors; we like to talk, so it was nice. Thank you for inviting me on.
I'm humbled because like I said, I've been looking for people to talk to me about these subjects, and it's been hard. It's been hard.
Okay.
Thank you
Well,
so much, Edward. Thank you
yeah,
so
thanks a
much.
lot.